Poetry of witness, but which is poetry whose purpose is to make an account of an event, to not witness and to tell, to not let one forget. In the global south, many countries have encountered horrors far beyond our understanding. Rather, these tragedies have appeared far too often in history until today, they have become simple tales that evoke a tear or two. People are imprisoned, people are tortured, people are killed, a lot of them in complete silence. They disappear without even a story of their death for their loved ones to remember them by. The Philippines has unfortunately been too familiar with this. In the wake of the martial law regime in the 1970s and the drug war under the Duterte administration. El Salvador is another country in Central America going through injustices of great magnitude. Carolyn Forché, the country between us, enlightens us using her personal experiences and poetry. Three poems in particular present the story encapsulating the inhumane struggle of people in El Salvador. The Visitor, the Colonel, and Because One is Always Forgotten. This trio tells us the realization of El Salvador to someone from the outside. The Visitor starts with a poet introducing us to a Hispanic character seemingly inside a prison. He appears to be on death row and is longing for his wife. As he whispers, "There is no time left," it is juxtaposed to the sound of farmers working in the field. The fate of the prisoner is one that may befall a normal man in El Salvador. A simple farmer can be subjugated to the dehumanization of isolation and mental anguish to the point of hallucination. Nature becomes the prisoner's comfort. He imagines the wind to be her wife's breath and his own hand to be hers, to be able to feel her love once more. He brings himself to a lonely fantasy before his death. The poet then states it is a small country. This statement tells us the irony of a small nation being divided through violence and oppression. In such a land where there may be nowhere to run to, no one is safe from being subject to this sentence. The small country of El Salvador does not only contain prisons, it is a social and physical cage in itself where one's limit for abuse gets tested. There is nothing one man will not do to another. Sadly, there may be no longer. This is what the visitor sees of El Salvador. This is the reality of El Salvador. In truth, this visitor may very well be the prisoner she tells us about, as this may happen to any man. From seeing the political scene from an outsider's perspective, the poet and the colonel becomes an active character. As a visitor inside the colonel's house, she described it as something typical at first glance. The colonel's family was present going about their mundane activities as if nothing significant was going to happen. There was a sense of normalcy. However, the house had broken glass embedded on the walls and gratings covering the windows. It was as if to prevent something or someone from going in. Upon closer look, the food seemed luxurious. There was a variety of it. A gold bell was placed on the table to call for the meal. The colonel lives a better life than that of a common Salvador. He complained about the difficulty of governance, showing an apparent apathy and disconnect to the masses. He was at the top of the social hierarchy, and the makeup of his home shows that his status was meant to be out of reach to the ordinary man. In addition, his authoritative demeanor showed no empathy. There was nothing the poet could have said if she wanted to live. She was subject to the colonel's whims. As he brings his bag of human ears to the table, show complete disregard for the rights of the people, and instruct the poet to tell her people to go fuck themselves, she could only watch and listen. The house, that seemed to keep people out now, appears to be more of a deadly cage for her. The Colonel jokes to her about poetry, being aware that this poem would be written about him. He holds this kind of omnipotent and omniscient aura within his house and within the poem. He threw the cut-off ears to the crowd. Some were described to have heard the Colonel's voice, and the others pressed to the ground. These were silenced victims. Some were the Colonel's enemies, and others were just unlucky to have been within the grasp of the tyrant whose power allowed him the liberty to keep trophies of his hunt, his murders. These kills were not just statistics. These numbers were people whom others loved and grieved for. In the last poem, because one is always forgotten, this character named Vera has passed. To the friends and family of the slave, it seemed like an end. Whatever one has with a person, it ceases upon their death. There is no more relationship, no more plans and goals together, and no longer a future. Vera was killed and it was the end. What more can be done for the others? The fellow peasants, workers, and other Salvadorans need something more, because after death, one is always forgotten. The poet said her heartfelt sympathy would mean nothing to the Campesino. In the cell of the prisoner and in the colonel's house, the heart will not keep one alive. Thoughts and prayers will not feed those in poverty and heal the sick. The heart cannot free the Salvadorans from the literal prisons to the figurative one of the Salvadoran Civil War. She tells the story of a boy soldier who peels the faces of dead men to put on a tree. By this tree, we remember the dead. By the boy's crude and gruesome work, we see our loved ones and do right by them. She says the heart is tough, but tenderness is in hands. To feel for the dead is not wrong, but with action, one will not be forgotten. Hence, these poems of Forche prove her words and her resolve. To witness the fight of the people of El Salvador, she has done her part to not let them be forgotten through her words. The Visitor, the Colonel, and Because One is Always Forgotten is a good collection of poems showing death in different parts. The Visitor showed the dead the moment before life was taken away. The Colonel showed the disposition of those who took it away. Because One is Always Forgotten showed the aftermath of the death. In all poems, there is hopelessness. Before violence, the Salvadoran could only succumb. This is the truth not only in El Salvador but for many countries that were colonies or those that were made to be places of war by stronger nations. In war and in tyranny, there is always death, fear, and suffering, most of which is inflicted upon the powerless. This is the truth that most know and yet do not feel at the same time. Such is the importance of works like Forche's, where we get to imbibe emotions from real stories. To read such poetry has made us feel as one of them even for a moment. To be subject to the same, even if only in mind. It made known to us that these horrifying scenes are happening in the real world. Thus, they should be spread as Forche has done. Literature has been one of the most influential and effective modes of transferring ideas. Words have real power. Books, scripts, and articles have been banned and censored here and there for this exact reason. Yet, there are stories that must be told again and again. The world is not always as glamorous, progressive, and free as Western media, or even the Manila-centric capitalist ideologies presented. Like Forche's poetry of witness, there are other stories to be written, told, and read.